1992 and again in 1996 that Bill Clinton should be their president.
The president's attorneys also produced a second report defending the president, calling Ken Starr's report a hit-and-run smear campaign. The report offers a point-by-point rebuttal to Starr's charges. The report says the president did not commit perjury by denying he had sex with Monica Lewinsky because the terms sexual affair and sexual relationship are inherently ambiguous and when used without definition cannot possibly amount to perjury. A veteran of the Watergate hearings met with the president yesterday, and afterwards, Representative Charles Rangel said he does not think Congress will hold hearings this year based on Starr's report.
He took a very situation of very poor judgment by the president and pumped it into a nickel and dime lurid sex story. I think that's all he had. He had no choice. He fired his best shot. It can't get worse than that, but it's not impeachable.
And the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee says the explicit nature of Starr's report presents a problem.
I'm not happy with the salacious material. I think one of the downsides or fallouts from this whole process has been giving too much currency to salacious activities and talk, and I don't think that's helpful to the country.
The president's vigorous defense will continue today with the president's attorney and supporters on the Sunday talk shows. But the White House is bracing itself for the reaction of the nation as people make their own decision on the Starr report. Several newspapers, including the Philadelphia Inquirer and Detroit Free Press, are already calling for the president's resignation. Aaron?
Mike, thanks. ABC's Mike Von Frem outside the White House this morning. Perhaps we'll never know how many people actually read the entire Starr report, but Americans across the country have certainly been busy reading some or all of it. Several newspapers published it in its entirety. In Boston, many people began their day yesterday by picking up a copy of the paper, as they always do, and reading things they couldn't imagine in the morning paper. In Los Angeles, people were also reading the paper, others on the internet, at internet cafes or at home, getting a glimpse of the report. The Starr report, of course, will dominate the conversation all morning on This Week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts. And Sam joins us this morning to chat on it some.
Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning, Sam. Sam, let me ask a question that is perhaps too long by half, so forgive me.
Go ahead, take whatever time you require.
My recollection of Watergate is that on the night of the Saturday Night Massacre, or at least the following day, the whole story flipped. The whole mood of the country changed. I don't see that happening here in what is arguably the worst moment for the president. Do you?
Well, clearly, Aaron, this business of impeachment is a political process. And if the people of the country do not want the president to be impeached, regardless of what he's done, he won't be. I think we'll see the evidence tested. I've always thought if there was a credible, sufficient evidence to suggest the president committed crimes, he would leave office. But that evidence, now presented by Ken Starr, does need to be tested, and the president's side needs to be presented. And that's what we're going to do on This Week. David Kendall, a very excellent criminal defense attorney, hired some time ago by the president during the Whitewater investigation, will be our guest. We're going to take a long time with Mr. Kendall, let him make the case, and we're going to question him, however, point by point. Because, as you know, the basis of the president's case is that engaging in oral sex with Monica Lewinsky was not sex. And so that when he answered that he had not had sexual relations with her 3 times in the Paula Jones deposition, when he was under oath, under the laws of perjury, he was not perjuring himself, because the president was using a narrow definition, he says, that the court approved. But the problem with, and the tough thing that Mr. Kendall has to do, and the president, in trying to convince people that sex is not sex, that narrow definition says if there was any touching to stimulate either side in a sexual way, that was sex. And Ms. Lewinsky has testified, according to the Starr report, that the president did touch her erogenous zones many times. So he's going to have to say she's lying, and of course that's always a possibility, to try to make this truck get through this little narrow opening.
I asked a long question. I guess I deserve the long answer.
You deserve the long answer, Aaron.
I'll be watching This Week with you and with Cokie and all your gang coming up a little bit
Well, I just
later.
want to say, Aaron, that Mr. Kendall, we're going to respectfully give him every opportunity to make his case, but he knows he's not come just to make speeches and to say that, Ken Starr is conducting a smear campaign. We want to question him in detail about his case.
I would expect no less, Sam. Thanks. ABC's Sam Donaldson in Washington this morning, and This Week coming up a little bit later this morning as well. A couple of other items to tell you about here. Northwest Airlines says 1/4 of its fleet will be up and running by
Lewinsky. The president lied to them as well as he lied to the American people and everyone else. But also, I think they didn't foresee the discovery process, the depositions, all of this, how deep it would go into the president's life and how many Pandora's boxes it would open.
On the subject of Pandora's boxes, Linda Tripp would be the next moment. There is the Kathleen Willey moment. We're not entirely sure what that is. And Robert Bennett, the president's lawyer in this matter, says of Linda Tripp, who claims to have observed Ms. Willey, Tripp is not to be believed, and this, we are told, by Ms. Tripp sets her off.
This, I think, it's easier to defend the lawyer's conduct. I mean, that is not a scathing attack. And all that Bob Bennett was doing with the Newsweek report was just saying, look, there's another side to this story. But then Linda Tripp sets out on this amazing journey. Well, she tapes her friend, and the tapes go to Ken Starr, and Ken Starr expands his jurisdiction. I think this falls into the category of a woman, Linda Tripp, who was looking for an excuse to go after the president, and Bob Bennett was only the convenient vehicle for it.
All right, and now this falls into the category of maybe it would have been different, but I'm not entirely sure. The president in early January, not in early January, I guess about mid-January of this year, speaks to this on the day the story broke, first with Jim Lehrer and then a couple of days later to the American people. He doesn't tell the truth.
No improper relationship. Define what you mean by that.
Well, I think you know what it means. It means that that there is not a sexual relationship, an improper sexual relationship, or any other kind of improper relationship. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
All right, Jeffrey, I hear two different things there. Help me with this. In the first one to Lehrer, he says there is no, present tense, there is no improper relationship. And then in that finger wagging to me and to the rest of the country, he says there has never been, or I never did. It's past tense in any case.
I think, notwithstanding the fact that I am a recovering lawyer, I'm also a human being, and you got to say it's never right to lie. I mean, it just is not right to lie. The interesting political question is, had he come clean then, would the firestorm have been bigger or smaller than it is now? I think it would have been smaller. I think people would have understood better. But clearly, those two comments were the president's own fault, and he made a situation worse with it.
And which brings us to the last one, and to me, the most annoying of them all, and that's the truth, and that is the president now testifies before the grand jury in August of this year, obviously, and then late that night sits down in the map room at the White House and talks to us and apologizes, kind of.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Miss Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong.
Would it have changed the game if he had said what he said on Friday at the prayer breakfast back in August?
I think there's no doubt that it would have. I mean, that speech was a political, legal, moral disaster. It's a good message that, people always say to you, don't do anything when you're really mad.
Yeah.
He was really mad coming out of that grand jury testimony. There were people around him who said apologize, but he was too mad to take their advice, and he has paid a very heavy consequence for it.
And we just have a few seconds here, but the great lesson here, at least one of them, is one we learned in Watergate, which is it ain't the crime, it's the cover-up.
It is the cover-up, and it remains to be seen whether the consequences will be the same as they were for Richard Nixon. We're on the knife's edge now.
Jeffrey, come back and see us.
Okay.
It's always nice to talk to you. Thanks, Jeffrey Toobin. When we come back, can look dramatically different. Over the weeks and months to come, Congress will decide which view of the president to endorse, the one portrayed in the Starr referral, or the one put forth by the president's lawyers, or perhaps one in between. But they aren't the only ones who are going to be dealing with this. The American public will also serve as judge and jury in the days and months ahead, and the public's viewpoints, the polls indicate, shaped by many different factors. So we close this morning with 3 more perspectives on the Clinton crisis, 3 different ways of seeing a leader in trouble.
All of you know that I've been on a rather painful journey these last few weeks.
One reason why this Clinton scandal is such a large event is because presidential scandals have been, in history, rather few and far between. You really have to come up to Richard Nixon to find a large scandal in which the president was at the center and he was directly responsible for the kind of things that were being charged. Bill Clinton, from the time he was in his mid-teens, imagined what it would be like if and when he became President of the United States. And the main person he thought of was John Kennedy. Perhaps in Clinton's mind was the idea that part of being the successor to John Kennedy as president might be to carry on something that was a little bit of a replica of John Kennedy's private life. History has a way of putting things into perspective, and my guess is that 20 or 30 years after the Clinton presidency, historians and the American people will begin to remember a lot of the good things he did as well.
I have no one to blame but myself for my self-inflicted wounds.
The Shakespeare hero has a tragic flaw. This flaw in the personality brings the man of power, or the great man, down, and brings him down to the level of the common man. In a sense, Clinton has a lot of these characteristics. Where the president is right now is that he's like a character in a Southern novel, very Faulknerian, like someone, you know, complete with the South, the wound, the genius for relating to people, and then ultimately reaching the highest point and then maybe making a mess of it. In all mythology, there's characters. Say you take the character of Ulysses, Odysseus, leaves his wife, Penelope. He's a great warrior. And Odysseus sets sail, and he's on his way home. What detains him? In some cases, women, the love of women, which is, I suppose, sensuality. And it's the male weakness, the flaw in him.
I hope that you and others I have injured will forgive me for the mistakes I've made.
At the very beginning, Americans were willing to overlook the entire Marvel mess because the economy was sad. The very fact that Americans were willing to overlook this Marvel erosion indicates that somehow we were all involved. We all had our own little private immoralities to deal with, and we said, well, so what else is new? Because it occurred in the Oval Office, Americans took a spiritual look at themselves. A spiritual mirror was placed in front of all of us, and we didn't like the sight. And now there is a yearning in the country to return to timeless values. He could have said, my fellow citizens, if my suffering, if my sin could turn into a spiritual metamorphosis, then I believe that everything will have been worthwhile.
We shall see. A couple quick program notes before we go here. This week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts among the guests, President's lawyer. Mr. Kendall will be there. Our coverage of the scandal and the Starr Report continues on World News Tonight Sunday. And then at 9 o'clock Eastern Time tonight, Peter Jennings anchors a special on the crisis at the White House. That's 9 o'clock Eastern Time tonight. We hope you'll join us for all of those, or at least some of them. And we hope you'll join us next Sunday. We'll see you in a week.